The Treaty of Fort Laramie is long, but all that is important to know is that most of the treaty has been forced upon tribal chiefs at the time, and that most of the clauses have been ignored by the U.S. government since then. Among which the treaty stipulates that all land east of the Mississippi River hereby is for the undisturbed and absolute use of Native Americans. Jump forward only 1 century.
People called the Indians of all tribes, and they were like,
we did it in protest of the broken treaties, the poor policies, the fact that they had denied us our culture and our heritage.
So there was a big fire that happened in 1969, and it burned down the American Indian Center in San Francisco. So
suddenly, the Native Americans lost their place of gathering, and there was Alcatraz, untouched for many years.
The coalition of like 89 members of the Indians of all tribes cruised across the San Francisco Bay.
On November 20th, 1969, protesters took over the Rock Island, declaring it native land, citing the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie, which gave Native Americans rights to abandon federal property.
The movement had a two-pronged approach. The first was to call for the wrongs done to the Native Americans to be justified. The second were calls for the establishment of a new American Indian Center on the island of Alcatraz, which they deemed to be their land. The protesters took a multi-pronged approach towards their objectives. First was cultural preservation through cultural activities on the island.
And the first memory that I have was getting off the boat and seeing the teepee.
Then it was through publicity stunts and interviews. Trudell, media genius, became the voice of Alcatraz.
Media.
We wish to be fair and honorable in our dealings with the Caucasian inhabitants of this land, and hereby offer the following treaty. We will purchase said Alcatraz Island for $24 in glass beads and red cloth, a precedent set by the white man's purchase of a similar island about 300 years ago. We know that $24 in trade goods for these 16 acres is more than was paid when Manhattan Island was sold, but we know that land values have risen over the years.
We will become an international outlet worldwide for authentic Indian art. And this will establish our base income to run the island and our university.
On the island, Warjack was a key strategist and one of the female voices in the leadership.
We wanted to initiate programs to talk about our truths and our histories.
The Indians seem to be picking up a lot of support. They have received several $1,000s in cash and foodstuffs.
Television news coverage spread the story of the occupation around the world. It drew attention to the occupiers' demands to end federal policies like forced relocation and the termination of tribal rights.
When we were on Alcatraz, surprisingly, President Nixon was very supportive of us.
President Richard Nixon persuaded Congress to pass a series of bills that ushered in a new era of tribal sovereignty and self-determination for American Indians.
I trust that this will mark one of those periods in American history where, after a very sad history of injustice, that we started on a new road to justice in the treatment of those who were the first Americans.
Alcatraz was the first. It was the beginning of a movement that will reshape Native policy in America. The Trail of Broken Treaty, Wounded Knee, The Longest Walk, it all started here. And that is the story of Alcatraz.